Hi, welcome to this presentation on IBM Spectrum Protect version 8.1.12 and its offering in the IBM Cloud Catalog. This offering became available October 25th, 2021, and what it allows you to do is deploy rapidly the IBM Spectrum Protect server into the IBM Cloud by simply clicking on a tile in the IBM Cloud Marketplace's catalog. And it is a bring your own license solution. It will enable you to protect workloads in the IBM Cloud, including Power VS, SAP HANA, IBM DB2, Microsoft REFS, and NTFS. It also offers hybrid protection for your on-premise workloads or as a replication target if you have an on-premise Spectrum Protect server. IBM Cloud is accessible by going to cloud.ibm.com, and then if you search on Spectrum Protect, you will bring up that specific tile. So the IBM Cloud Catalog tile, when you click on it, it's going to automatically deploy in under an hour the Spectrum Protect version 8.1.12 server and client. It will deploy it into the customer's virtual private cloud. And it will do the configuration of the virtual machine, the disk, and object storage that's going to be needed to fit the size of the Spectrum Protect server as outlined in our Spectrum Protect blueprints. And so you will be able to select a reference architectural size. We have a proof of concept, a small, a medium, and a large server. And if you read the Spectrum Protect blueprints beforehand, it'll give you an understanding of what size you need. So when it lays down the Spectrum Protect server, it also puts in the Spectrum Protect server DB2 database and logs, the operations center, and it installs the DSM ADMC command line administrator client and the DSMC command line client. Inside of Spectrum Protect server, it will define the cloud connections, the device classes, and the cloud storage pool. In addition, it will link a cloud container cache, which acts as that accelerator cache. So basically, the Spectrum Protect server is ready then to be customized by the customer and start to receive the customer's backups. Now, the customer will manage and do daily administration on this server. And they will also need to bring their own license to this solution, and that license can be purchased through Passport Advantage. And then they'll want to copy a key down to the Spectrum Protect server and register the license inside of the Spectrum Protect server. In addition, if you're going to, for instance, back up SAP HANA or IBM DB2, you'll want to download and install the additional Spectrum Protect client components and install them as well. As new versions of Spectrum Protect become available, it will also be up to the customer to download and install those. I do have a demo of doing this if you want to check out the demo, and I've put the link here that's out on YouTube also. A key feature of Spectrum Protect's presence in the IBM Cloud is that we actually have a deployment guide available, and this deployment guide is based upon blueprints that I'll talk about here in a minute. So this deployment guide is going to be your step-by-step guide for deploying this solution. It'll talk about the architectural options, which link back into our blueprints. And with this a sizing guide, it'll also talk about the purchasing and registering licenses in order to be entitled on the IBM Cloud, and best practices for configuring Power VS and SAP HANA for backups. Now, the different sizes of architecture that you can buy, the small, medium, or large for the Spectrum Protect server in the IBM Cloud are all based upon our blueprints. And our blueprints give guidance on things like the type of processors that need to be utilized, how much disk space is required, the disk speeds, and so forth. So when we engineered this IBM Cloud tile solution, we took into consideration what we'd already outlined and tested in-house, written up in our blueprints, and now we're putting those into action on our IBM Cloud solution. We also have in-depth seismic and YouTube content, so if you do want to learn about a specific feature, you can go and check that out and those places. And if you are an IBM seller or business partner, there are additional sizing tools available to assist with the customers getting very specific if, for instance, they have the need to keep data for especially long time or a specific number of versions, all of that can be plugged into these sizing tools. So prior to deploying the Spectrum Protect server into the IBM Cloud, the customer does have to have an existing virtual private cloud, and this has to be Gen 2, and there does need to be a subnet available. We will utilize the Internet Gateway during the deployment, and this will be specifically utilized for the Spectrum Protect server to communicate with the IBM Cloud services, like the schematics, as well as our log DNA, where we'll enter errors or progress steps along the way. Once you click that tile, you will be prompted for some specific information. The initial screen will show you the IBM Cloud and Terraform. These are presets. You can't choose anything else there. You'll then be able to specify a workspace name and a resource group, and then optionally you can add tags to that. You'll then expand the parameters without default values section, and you'll need to enter a bucket name, and this bucket is going to be used for the Spectrum Protect object storage, our cloud storage pool, and this can either be a new or an existing bucket. You'll specify a client password. This password is going to be used for our Operations Center as well as our Spectrum Protect administrator. Then you'll enter an IBM Cloud API key, and this has to have the permissions to purchase virtual server instances, block storage volumes, cloud object storage volumes, and so on. Next, you'll choose which size of the Spectrum Protect server you'll want to deploy. You can go with the proof of concept, which you can use for 30 days. You can go with the small, medium, or large. And once again, the small, medium, large sizing are following the prescriptive architectures we outline in our Spectrum Protect blueprints. You'll need an existing SSH key, and that will be in order to log into the Bastion and Spectrum Protect server. And then you'll set a virtual server host name. The third section is parameters with optional default values. This will include an IBM Cloud region. By default, it is going to be EU-DE, so Germany and Europe. Obviously, you can change that. You can optionally set an encryption key. This is going to be for your cloud resources. This is not your Spectrum Protect built-in server-side encryption, so it is different from that. And then you can also enter a logging instance key. Once you've entered all of those information and clicked go, it will start the deployment, which will take approximately an hour. First of all, we will deploy a virtual server instance for the Spectrum Protect server. And once again, this is deployed according to the selected size and with the correct resources needed based upon our blueprints. We'll set up a security group that's going to restrict the access to the Spectrum Protect server, and then we'll install and configure the Spectrum Protect server. We'll also set up a virtual server for the Bastion host, and this is going to include a floating external IP address for secure connections. This security group is going to restrict access to the Bastion server. Now you can remove this Bastion host afterwards if you so desire, if you already, for instance, have a Bastion host server set up elsewhere in your IBM Cloud environment. We'll then set up block storage disks for the Spectrum Protect server, which will be used for our operating system, the Spectrum Protect database, the cloud archive logs, and the cloud cache logs. We'll also carve out a bucket for our object storage, which is where we will actually store the backed up data. A log DNA area is utilized. If an existing key was provided, then that instance can be used to store the logs that are generated. And these are logging information not only during the installation, but also while that Spectrum Protect server is up and running. And these are the types of logs that support might need if there is some type of issue they've got to help debug. Now, if you did not provide a key for the log DNA, then a new instance is going to be deployed and configured automatically to store those logs. A key protect service, if encryption CRN key was provided, then at-rest encryption is enabled and used to encrypt the block storage disks and cloud object storage buckets. If an encryption key was not provided, then encryption is disabled. When we install the Spectrum Protect server, we will automatically install and customize the following. First of all, a Spectrum Protect server version 8.1.12. That server name came from what was chosen during your IBM Cloud setup. as was the server password. Your server low-level address will be set to 1500. The cloud connection type will be an S3 and will be named Cloud Connection, and our cloud device class will be Cloud Dev class. The cloud container storage pool is named Cloud, and it does have an accelerator cache that uses the /tsmccl directory. DB recovery is set up, and an administrator with system privileges is also registered, and it has the name of tsminst1 and the password that you chose during setup. Now that administrator and password can be used to access the Operation Center, as well as utilizing the DSM ADMC, which we installed, and then we also laid down the DSMC code. However, we do not register a Spectrum Protect node. If you are using a hybrid situation, maybe you're using it to protect SAP HANA, that SAP HANA could reside on-premise, or it could reside in the cloud, or both. Now, likewise in this hybrid environment, and I don't show that in the diagram here, but you could also have a Spectrum Protect server instance on-prem as well. And so maybe this is an existing Spectrum Protect server that's primarily backing up your on-premise workloads. Not a problem. I'll show you how we can work with replication on that. So after the Spectrum Protect has been deployed into the IBM Cloud, you can see how the Spectrum Protect server can protect either the on-premise or the in-cloud SAP HANA instance. Now, not shown on this diagram, but the same idea also applies if you had a Spectrum Protect server on-premise. You could then replicate to or from the Spectrum Protect server that was deployed inside of the IBM Cloud and give yourself a disaster recovery server that has all the most recent backup data on it. Security pillar that's built around the Spectrum Protect is, first of all, our Bastion host is going to have that public floating IP, and that's going to meet the security best practices as outlined by the IBM Cloud. And the Spectrum Protect server is on a private subnet, so it is not accessible via an external internet. We do set up a restricted security group configured on that Bastion and Spectrum Protect server. It will only allow the communication from the required ports and IPs. An SSH connection is allowed to the Bastion Spectrum Protect host as long as you have that SSH PIM key. And then authentication using the username and password is going to be disabled due to the IBM Cloud VSI security regulations. So Spectrum Protect is, once again, bring your own license, and those licenses you can work with your IBM sellers or your business partners or your digital channels to purchase those licenses, and then you'll go out to our Passport Advantage and download those licenses and register them in your new IBM Cloud Spectrum Protect server instance. Okay, be sure to check out the other YouTubes I have. I've got a couple out there showing demos of the actual installation of the Spectrum Protect server via the IBM Cloud catalog. Thank you very much.